So, good. We have plenty of time for questions, which is great. I've certainly got a few written down here myself. So, let's throw it out into the audience. So, is it Danny at the back there?
Hello, thank you both of you for your talks. I'm just interested in this off-campus process. Does that kind of work like EduRoam? Do you know what I mean by EduRoam? Yeah.
So there are some challenges with security around EduRoam. This has been designed to make use of the most recent web standards, including things like OpenID Connect, to identify individuals and maintain quite tight security over off-campus access. There'll be a lot more information coming out about CASA in particular over the next few months.
Okay, thank you. Next. Somebody waving their arms? Okay, while you think of some questions, there's somebody just there.
Jennifer Smith from St George's, University of London. Thanks for the presentations and the ones earlier this morning. It sounded from Kent's talk that you feel a bit defensive around the publishing process. I don't think many people might disagree that there is work involved in the publishing process, and that work needs to be costed. I think where there's a bit of maybe room for manoeuvre is the charges that are paid, for instance, in the open access area. So a Wiley invoice that I saw yesterday was for nearly 3,000 GBP. So BMC rates can be much less than that. So I think when the conversation turns to protection, sometimes the query could be in the mind, what is it that's being protected? And frankly, if open access charges were lower, then more researchers could publish their work and get it out there and get it used and discussed and built on. So yes, I don't think there's any problem with profit. It's a fair profit, and how that fits into what researchers and the scholarly world is trying to achieve, getting their work out and getting it widely used. Thank you.
Kent, do you want to comment on that at all?
So a few comments come to mind. One is that for most publishers that aren't pure open access, a lot of the charges are subsidized by the subscription business. Open access has been around for 20 years or so, and it's still a minority share of the market. So if it really offered both viable commercial options which publishers would rationally pursue, and also help protect the scholarly record as much as a model where all of the various steps are taken, like I've outlined and more, I would think that it would just have burned right through the market and been taken up. I think there are concerns at multiple levels with it because open access tends to respond to volume, and I've seen and multiple times where if the revenues of a publisher are iffy around open access, they will simply say, well, just accept more papers then. We just need to lower our barrier. And I don't know if the scholarly record is improved by that practice. I would actually assert that maybe that's a questionable practice, because if you get into the guts of many publishers, you find that not all authors are honest, not all research is great, a lot of it's underpowered. There just was a story where one of the author of the Thinking Fast and Slow book that was mentioned yesterday, Daniel Kahneman, said that one of the chapters he was he said he had regrets about that chapter in the book because he had relied on underpowered studies and things that were too weak for him to make the assertions that he made in that chapter. And I think that's happening more and more as we get weaker and weaker research that's published simply to feed an economic model that benefits from that. So I think there are concerns there about where is the threshold, where is the power, because statistics are pretty clear about when you actually have demonstrated something and when you haven't. So I think that's a concern, and I think that's probably part of the reason why there continues to be all of the expense and all of the work and all of the editorial work and all of the checks against plagiarism and use of statisticians, which I didn't even mention. There are a lot of top journals use statisticians increasingly, actually. And they're expensive. They tend to be overburdened because it becomes a hallmark of quality for the paper to actually pass statistical review. And editors are becoming pickier about that. So you have a market where there are a lot of assertions about the fact, and it's interesting. I'm going to go on for a bit on this one. So reading this book about the death of expertise, one of the things that became clear from that and other things that I've been reading is that one reason that expertise is undermined so often is because people think that they can just go online, look up something, and very quickly become experts in that. And they get more confidence than their background would rationally convince you that they should have, not only about what they looked up, but about anything they encountered on the way. So if they looked up fossil fuels, they would come out with greater confidence in their knowledge about dinosaurs, right? If they looked up icebergs, they would come out with greater knowledge about, greater confidence in their knowledge about oceans. And then they start to think, well, experts aren't really all that special because I just Googled it and I feel like I'm as fast as Usain Bolt. So, he's fast, but now I feel fast too. And I think having all of this information out there that's less and less differentiated and can feed any particular thought that comes into someone's mind starts to make it feel like there's an answer for everything and any opinion you have is equally valid. And I think that's a real threat to the truth. And so I think we have to attenuate where the level is of knowledge. When does knowledge occur? When has a fact emerged? And if we simply are publishing for the expediency of a money-making gamut, which is to me what APCs start to look like, it's not an attenuation that I can get behind.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to kind of add to this that this issue about is it well known that publishing actually takes time and requires effort? I'm not sure it is well known, and actually one of the things that prompts some of the conversation at this conference, 2 years ago at ALPS, a well-known and respected academic said, I will never submit, 39% of you have already heard this, but anyway, I will never submit an article to a journal that charges a submission fee because peer review costs absolutely nothing. And last year we had Alice Allingham, who is in the business of managing and administering peer review, stand up here and explain in great detail exactly what goes on in the process of peer review, talking about building up a panel and maintaining it and assessing pre-publication and all that.
To that point, Mark, when I was running the Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery, we put in a submission charge. And it was a fairly expensive one because orthopedic surgeons are rich, right? So it's $250. One effect it had was all of the level 4 evidence papers, because there's a level of evidence scheme in orthopedics. All the level 4 papers went away because all those people who were just taking a moonshot said, ooh, too rich for my blood. They came back in a couple of years, but it took a couple of years. The other thing that happened is it caused us to calculate what it cost us to reject a paper, It was like $1,500 for every paper that we didn't publish. That's a huge hidden cost that a lot of people don't appreciate, and that's actually one of the benefits of open access. You don't have to incur that cost. You can make money by not rejecting more papers. So you actually get a double win in a way.
And the misinformation.
It varied. It was a mix, actually. Yeah, we had specific numbers, but I don't recall them off, for just editorial rejection and then editorial and review rejection, because it actually was more expensive to send it out for peer review, because you had more people and their salaries and the systems charges. Yeah, good.
Tallies with my background.
Yeah, right.
And the misinformation is quite strong. So after last year's presentation on peer review, the Times Educational Supplement reported on that presentation as peer review admin takes less than 1 hour per paper. So basically their message was peer review costs £7. Which was by no means not what the data was suggesting. Anyway, sorry. So next person, Aaron in the middle there.
Hi, Aaron from Maverick. Just coming to Ken's defense a little bit here as well. Is Emma from eLife around here? Would you mind if I quote you? Not you, but your blog. I will do that in a minute. Sorry, I wanted to make sure you're around. So one thing I found most fascinating on the pricing of open access articles is actually the statement which came out from eLife on how much it actually costs to publish an article. And I would very much suggest to point people looking at that article, because eLife, they put the price at about $2,500. I think it's dollars or pounds. What is it? $2,500 APC, just so everybody can hear that. And that only covers the basic costs of it. And I think that's a very, very important statement where no publisher had to open up their accounts for that. That's a very transparent statement which is out there. And we should bear that in mind when we talk about APCs are too high. And of course, the other thing APCs also pay for is for articles where we waive APCs, because that is a very, very important point as well, that for any articles which come from poorer regions which can't afford the APC, we waive them as well. And the third point is the point Mark just kindly already made, is if you ever have been sitting in an office trying to get peer reviewers for an article, and you're a person that's trying to desperately look for one, you know how much it costs to do that process.
And I would also say that around the APCs, around costs for publishing in general, there are large error bars. There are lots of ways to get it done. High-end journals, the ones with major and multiple international editorial offices, and a lot of layers, and that cover a lot of specialties, are more expensive. And ones that are very focused on a particular area, maybe only have one or two editors, maybe only one manuscript person or office manager, they're much less expensive. But then you get into all of the infrastructure, the costs that go into that, and then the publishing infrastructure and the archive infrastructure, and it just becomes, it's an economic reality we have to face.
Anthony at the front there.
Anthony Watkinson, Cyber Research. I want to just take issue with something Kent said. He won't be surprised. It was a different one this time. Over the years in publishing, I've started hundreds of journals, okay? This has been in academic press, Chapman Hall, Oxford University Press, so non-profits, not-for-profits, but never for learned societies, okay? If you start a new journal, you have a devil of a job getting enough copy in. Now, you can get the first issue out, but you pledged yourself to bring out so many issues, usually 4. The pressure is on you to fill up the space because it's already been paid for. Now, what you do, you have double issues, you scrape around, you find conferences, you put them in. Everybody I know in every publisher has done this at some time. Perhaps not in the big medical publishers, which is what Kent knows about, but I know about this. Now, I cannot see why the pressure in open access journals should be as high as that, because you've got nobody who has paid for it to insist that you get out these numbers. Gordon and Breach was a good example of what used to happen. We all know about that.
Right, so I think that's a fair point, and I've had the same experience too. The early days you're always scratching for seed, right? Especially on the content side. That's usually and an experienced hand like you or me or others will know that that's coming and do as much preparation in advance to attract high-profile editors, to get them to rally their friends, to get somebody with coattails, to prime the market, but it's still difficult. I think the difference in the subscription model is that tends to attenuate up over time, where you have people pushing the content to make it better, to increase the how much you sell into the market, because that's where the business model works. And so it needs to compete on the quality aspect. But what I continue to see is that the open access publishers mainly compete on the quantity aspect, and that's what drives their financial model to a point. What's interesting to watch is PLOS, with PLOS 1 and the impact factor really being outpaced by scientific reports. And that's an interesting one, but I think that's attributable to some extent. I don't know what I would guess it's attributable to is to some extent the portfolio effect of the nature titles, the fact that they're cascading from nature and nature children. There's an editorial and business model there that's worldwide and bigger, and I think it'll be interesting to see how PLOS 1 responds to that, because this may be, and it's healthy to see this, that's where competition, it's nice to have a competitive mega journal because now they may compete on quality. Now PLOS 1 may say, okay, and they did install an editor-in-chief, right? I think that's the first move in sort of saying, okay, we need to up our game now because this other group is eating our lunch. We're now down to a margin that may not be defensible and may put us underwater, and our impact factor is going down as well. We're not attracting the best authors, so on and so forth. So I think it's really good to have the competition because that may ultimately prove me wrong, which I would be fine with.
Seed, and when you think why are you starting these bloody awful journals, they're not intrinsically awful from the start. You just find that people give an example. Years and years ago, I started a journal called Molecular Medicine. Sidney Brenner, I think, was the editor. It failed. It failed
That can
totally.
happen, yeah.
It was too early.
Yeah.
And this happens all the time.
Yeah.
And it's not just a matter of journals that succeed. Problem.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's part of the risk that publishers take on behalf of authors, right? And you see, if you subscribe to, if you're a member of Crossref, you see the list of journals that have folded or been subsumed or things like that where there have been changes to the DOI record. So I totally agree. I mean, it's not a risk-free undertaking at all.
I would like to sort of address the other point that Anthony made about open access journals being potentially a lower risk to launch. That's as maybe. I worked at Biomed Central for 4 years and we launched several hundred journals under the Biomed Central and Springer Nature labels at that point. And I can promise you, we scratched around and scraped around for content just as much there as I ever did when launching a subscription journal. Just because the barrier to entry is not as high does not mean that publishers don't want these journals to succeed and don't want to have a consistent flow of copy being published in those journals. It's not just a publish one article and you're done.
Okay, thank you. All right, a couple more questions. I've not heard from the access control nerds in the room to ask detailed access control
So
questions.
one thing I have to, since I have to promote my own company since I have the
No,
opportunity.
you're not allowed to promote your own company.
Oh, but it's free. It's a free service. It's a free service.
Even so, anyway, go on.
Oh well.
No, go for it.
So RedLink runs RedLink Network, which is a community-driven IP registry service that publishers can take advantage of. It allows libraries and corporate subscribers to broadcast IP changes to you. It validates them, and you can get accurate IPs and keep them up to date, and it's free. So if you want to take advantage of that, it ties in a little bit with one of Tasha's last points, which is, knowing what the proper IPs are is a challenge, and if you're getting them straight from the horse's mouth and they're validated through automation and the community, that's an easy way to do it. So I would recommend that.
I would actually really like to know how you guys do your validation, because what we've seen with SAMS over the last 14 years is that the libraries can on fairly regular occasions give us some very interesting IP ranges. So it would be good to know how you validate.
We'll talk.
Okay. A lady at the front there who may be in the IP business.
Laura Coxon-Ringgold, and not in the IP business, but certainly a nerd. So yeah, I'm asking a question because Mark has essentially asked me to. The whole part to do with access and authentication, to do with single sign-on and the barriers to remote access is actually incredibly complicated.
Oh God, yeah.
And one of the, you mentioned multiple entitlements, but I think there's actually another piece that often gets missed from this puzzle, and that is that we talk a lot about the high-impact research journals. We're talking about the high-quality content. We're not talking about aggregated databases. We're not talking about undergrad usage. we're not necessarily always talking globally. And so the impact of trying to make a new system work rather than cleaning up IPs is increasingly complicated, because you're going to need to make sure that every institution, including all of those that you've never heard of, is going to be compliant with it. So could you, both of you actually sort of describe how you see the route to solving that problem?
So I'm going to start by saying, how many of you know what proportion of access to your journals or your other content is via IP? Anyone? Okay, so 2 people. That's a good start. What I can tell you is that across the Semantico customer base, more than 90% of access is still through IP recognition. So saying that we're going to replace IP that scares me. That's a massive ask, to replace 90% of access control with something new.
Well, can I jump in? I think one of the misnomers of these discussions that I've heard from RA21 and others is that IP recognition is still part of this. I think it's supplementing it with a layer that makes it so that it's more transportable and also more machine-based. And that means you still need accurate IPs underneath it, because they actually they are going to need to be there so that when the person rotates back into campus, the machine can say, all right, they're back on campus, and I can renew whatever sort of certificate or whatever sort of item on the machine is going to say, okay, you've got another 30 days or 60 days or whatever, or I'm going to take this other route. So I don't think it's a replacement.
I absolutely agree, but I have heard a number of people within the RA21 initiative talk about replacing IP. It's not going away, and we do need to think beyond the journal. So yes, we've been talking about journals a lot, but all of the other content types are still massively valuable, and we must make sure that whatever we put in place does work across all of those different types of scholarly output. It's got to be a portable solution that works equally well in mathematics and in anthropology and in arts. Everybody has to be able to use this.
And I will, just after thinking about it, I will tell you how we check our IPs. So there are automated ways to do it. There are various databases that you can concatenate and come up with a pretty good range. There are also easy ways to catch ranges that are too big or that are unusual or that contradict other ranges that you have or overlap, and you can flag those back. But the fundamental thinking here is that the community will manage itself. So when a library updates its IPs, and if it passes all of the various checks that we have, and then it gets broadcast to a publisher, if a publisher says, I don't approve that, then there's a way to feed back into the system and let let that library correct it and rebroadcast it so that it's accurate, and then every other connected publisher knows what the correct one is. So the community actually manages itself as sort of the final step after an automated set of checks based on concatenations of data and rules.
Okay, good. We've got time for probably 1 or 2 more at the back. Andrew.
Hi, I'm just going to make a quick statement because Sci-Hub's been mentioned a few times, and RA21 and IP addresses. I think IP addresses have been given a bit of a bad rap by Sci-Hub. Everybody is kind of blaming the IP address, but it's not the IP address. We've been doing a lot of research just recently with some very large publishers, and what we found is that a lot of this Sci-Hub activity is coming from a place about 50 miles north of Moscow. They are hackers, and what they do is they fish for credentials, they fish for email addresses from people from universities, and then they send phishing emails out saying, oh, your credentials have been stolen, you need to go in and change your credentials, and which people do, and that's how they gain access to the university portals. So it's really the usernames and passwords that are being stolen, and these are being stolen by people who are racketeers. It's kind of state-run. The latest one we caught, the guy had about 180 IP address ranges and domains that he owned. It was 58,000 IP addresses. They were in 56 different countries, and they're using masking services to mask the IPs that they use for the phishing so that they can steal the content. So anybody that thinks that Sci-Hub is, kind of Robin Hood, it's a movement, it's not. It's racketeering, it's run, And what they're also doing, because this same guy who is stealing the content for Sci-Hub is the same guy that stole 4 million credit card numbers from Yahoo. So it's a lot more to it than people thinking that this is great, this is going to stick one to the man, the big publisher. It's not at all. And it's not IP addresses that are the problem, it's the theft of credentials. And they're stealing much more than just content from the libraries.
So just to pick up on that, so one of the improvements that is coming across the web generally is two-factor, two-step authentication. So we've implemented that, Google's implemented that, Facebook, a lot of places have implemented that, and you should use it whenever you can. The other thing I read this morning is that Google and Microsoft are going to stop featuring content from proven pirates. So they're not going to show it in search results anymore, which I think is great, because that's one of the main ways that this content has gotten out there. So hopefully at the point of purchase, so to speak, it stops as well. But I think Andrew's point is exactly right. This was not, Sci-Hub was not, it may have been somebody's virtuous idea, but it was criminal, they were criminal actors who helped her do that, and they did it for nefarious purposes, not because they're trying to expand the remit of knowledge. So, woohoo.
Personally, to the librarians in the room, our observation is that most of the Sci-Hub activity that has come through SAMS has been because institution-level username and password combinations have been shared. So it would be fantastic if libraries and institutions were willing to stop using institution-level user pass details. They are incredibly insecure. So.
And as my non-brother pointed out in a post, Mr. Anderson, a lot of universities use single sign-on. So those credentials not only gave them access to the library and its holdings, but to maybe grading systems or tax documents or HR systems, or hospital systems. So who knows what they got while they were crawling around in there, and we thought they were just stealing content. They went through a door that nobody thought mattered.
And on that cheery note,
Should we go for lunch?
Yeah.
I think this might be the moment to break on that cheerful conclusion. Okay, just another reminder, I have a lovely pink pair of reading glasses to give away to a lucky prize winner. Oh, there's somebody at the back. They're just up here. But before we just break for lunch, and we'll be back at 1:50, let's please just thank the excellent speakers in this session. Thank you very much.